Today on the Obstacle Overcomer podcast, we are talking about overcoming bad money management and mindsets with my very special guest, Shawn Dorrough. This is the Obstacle Overcomer podcast, dedicated to helping you overcome the obstacles that have been holding you back. My name is Nikki, and I'm a mother, author, empowerment speaker, singer, narrative changer, and obstacle overcomer. Each week, I'll be bringing you both the spiritual and practical tools that will empower you to overcome the challenges that you've been facing. You have the power to change the narrative of your life. You don't have to accept things as is. And always remember, obstacles are not barriers. They are stepping stones. Shawn Dorrough has worked in the financial industry for over 23 years. He is passionate about helping people increase their financial knowledge so they can build wealth. He is the creator of the Wealth Shift Project that helps individuals and couples simplify the complicated in their business and in their bank accounts. Shawn is also the author of 4 wealth building books. He has also contributed to Financial Juneteenth, The Huffington Post, and Lifeway Christian Publications. Shawn resides in Dallas, Texas with his beautiful wife of 24 years and their 2 daughters. Stay tuned because today's show is not a show that you're going to want to miss. So you've just heard a little bitty synopsis of his bio in my intro, but you're really going to learn the heart of this man when it comes to shifting our minds concerning wealth and concerning our finances, but also teaching us how to become better stewards over what God has placed in our hands. So without further ado, let's bring Shawn Dorrough to join us in on the conversation. We're going to go ahead and kick off today's show. Hey, Shawn, and welcome.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing and excited that you are here today. It is such an honor to have you on as my very first guest here on my new podcast. So thank you.
Wow. Well, I'm honored to be not just on this show, but I'm humbled that I am the first guest. So that is a true honor, and I appreciate you asking me.
Absolutely. I'm trying not to jump into your Money Monsters book, which I will be bringing up, but knowing you over the last few years and following you, you are amazing and absolutely remarkable. But I love your heart. I love the way you teach. I love your podcast and the way you love to educate people about their finances. I talked a little bit about your bio earlier. You've been in the financial industry for over 23 years. You are the wealth shifter. You have authored several books, amazing books, by the way, everybody. One of which I'm very in love with is called Money Monsters, and we will get into that in just a little bit. But not only do you teach and you mentor and you coach people to financial freedom and financial education, but you live the principles that you talk about, and you live them because of what you have gone through. Please share with us your personal debt to financial freedom story. We would love to know, what was it that sparked you? Like, what was the pivotal moment in your life when your mind began to shift when it came to your finances?
Well, and as you mentioned, it's been a long journey. I've been in the financial industry for over 23 years now. But if you look at my beginning, you would be hard pressed to determine that I would end up doing the things that I do right now, which is travel the country, stand up in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people for that matter, and teach about finances and money and how to make, manage, multiply, and maintain it. That's my goal. That's my heart. That's my burden. That's my assignment from God. But that wasn't always the case, because at one point I was broken. I always tell people I was battling bills, bad credit, and bankruptcy. We were about $200,000 in debt. We, meaning my newlywed, my new bride at the time, and I was depressed, frustrated, angry, and also overweight, and all that was an accumulation of being a poor steward. And everything came to somewhat of a hilt, somewhat of a fork in the road the day I was robbed in broad daylight. And I say I was robbed in broad daylight because even though no one put a gun up to my head, no one forced me to give up my money, it was robbery because I walked into a payday loan place and I had to hand over, a check that I was writing in advancement. I was paid that following week, but I needed money that day. So I had to write a cash advancement, and they charged me a 400% annual percentage rate. And I knew that was robbery, but I was in a situation where I couldn't do anything about it, Nikki. So I had to take their terms, and I walked out and I cried like a baby, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I literally, speaking of baby, I just became a father. As mentioned, I just stepped into a marriage, and I was failing at both of them, and I desperately needed to change my system and not take this thing any further if I knew I was going to be successful at being a husband and a father. So that was the moment I'd said it's time to make a wealth shift. Now, obviously, it took me several years, several mistakes, several bumps. But what I learned over that time frame was if I just applied particular principles to my life, not only could I create what I call a wealth shift, but now I can help others do exactly the same. So now I stand here flat-footed, humbly and gratefully saying that we are debt-free. We owe nobody anything. Obviously, we survived through those turmoils. We're celebrating our 25th year of marriage this year. We're in a situation where we now get a chance to bless others. We have multiple businesses. Again, net worth over $1 million. And I don't say any of that to pat myself on the back. I really say that to express that it is a matter of doing it the right way, God's way, and going through a system that we can talk about. But the journey doesn't have to take a long time. It just really requires what you're talking about, a mind shift switch. I always tell people, most of us do not have a money problem. We may have a mindset problem or a mechanics problem, or maybe a mess problem or a lack of mentor problem or whatever it is, but you don't have a money problem. But until you get it fixed in between the 6 inches between your skull, it's not going to change. And that's where, again, I help people with that as well as a couple of different areas. And then they'll immediately start making that wealth shift.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. How much does an individual's mindset play into their financial habits?
I would say it's 80% mindset, 20% mechanics. So when you start talking about creating or changing or accumulating or growing or building anything, your money, your family, your spiritual life, your health, it requires, first of all, shifting in your mind. I always ask people, how do you see? When I really sit down and I help people with their finances, one of the first questions is, well, how do you see? And they look at me strange because they, what do you mean, how do I see? I see with my eyes. I said, that's incorrect. I said, you see through your eyes, but you see with your mind.
Right.
So I know it sounds semantics. I know it sounds like, it's a play on words, but until you understand it, until you see it, you won't see it.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, I had to understand that I had to see myself out of debt. I had to see myself understanding about money. I had to see myself creating finances and wealth. I had to see myself teaching, not just myself, my family, but now thousands of people around the country, like I get a chance to do. I had to see it before I can see it. And that's where, again, the Bible is very clear. You walk by faith, not by sight. In other words, if you can't see it in the mind, then there's no way you can accumulate it and you can manifest it. So I would say it's very important. I think it's 80%. So once you see it, now you have to now put the practical principles on top of it, or the mechanics around the thing that you're trying to accomplish. And the mechanics are easy. I mean, look, we all know, what it requires to be in good health or to save money or to have a great relationship. Those are mechanics. Everybody knows, and anybody can Google how to do those things. The reason why majority of people are still stuck, reason why majority of people are still being in a situation where they're challenged, is because the mindset is not completely shifted where it needs to go to get them where they want to be.
I love it. So today I should have titled it Mindset Shift and Wealth Shift and Money Shift, like all of that in one, because what I get from that is it's really all about the perception. That to me is where the sight of the mind and the way you see things meet up. Some of the issues and problems just in the minority community is the way that the mindsets were taught or were in the household that you grew up in or the environment that you grew up in. I have some friends that they are so money minded that they cannot fathom not having a lot of the things that you teach about, money in the savings account, retirement set. They cannot fathom not having those things. But then I know a lot of people that they were on survival mode so much that their parents couldn't teach them those things because they were busy teaching them about how to survive day to day. So when you encounter those different types of mindsets in your field,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things that you do to help them shift their mindsets, as well as educating them on things that they don't know how to perceive because they've never heard of it before?
Sure. And that's a great question, because here's the truth. Most people don't even know their own money personality. You just mentioned and talked about what we all go through, especially in our community, where most of us are one or two generations beyond just hand to mouth.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And that's not a knock on our grandparents. They were doing what they needed to do to survive. But now we're in a situation, and yes, there's still some inequality. There's still some unjust, unfair things going on, but there should be nothing stopping us from having whatever we want, other than the fact that we come from a culture or personality that is still on us today, that is holding us, and they're creating invisible jails. So, for example, there are money personalities that I tell people all the time, if I gave you $1,000 and I ask the question, what's the first thing you'll do? You'll give me a glimpse of your money personality. See, there's only 5 things you can do with money. You can give it, you can save it, you can spend it, you can invest it, or you can protect it. So a lot of people start throwing out, hey, I'm going to go spend it on X, or I'm going to go give some to my family, or I'm going to go tithe, or I'm going to throw it in the bank, or I'm going to make sure that I, put an insurance policy on it. Whatever it is tells me somewhat of your money personality, and it gives me the base. None of the personalities that I work with are bad, but I can tell you the most common money personality is the spender. So if you are a natural spender, you understand that if I gave you X amount of money, I'm shocked, and I was this way. How many people at the end of the year, I have a friend who owns his own tax business. He says it all the time. People will get to the end of the year and they look at their W-2s and they can't believe they made that much money, or they can't believe they made X. Why? Because they don't have anything
to show for it
over it. Absolutely. So they're looking at it saying, I made X amount of money? Really? Why? Because the next question is, where did it all go?
Yes.
So that's a spender mentality. There's another mentality. It's called the avoider mentality. See, a lot of times I sit down with clients and there's no judgment around it, but I'll ask them things like, are you paying, or what are the interest rates you're paying on your house, or your cars, or your student loans, and things like that? Or what's your credit score, or any particular question around money? And I get these big question marks over their head. And that's the information that they say. I've never really dug deep into that. Why? Because it's complicated. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's like Chinese math. So I avoid those details because those details make me uncomfortable, but those details could be making you broke.
Ooh.
So that's where, again, the avoider personality, it's not a knock on them. It's just maybe they were never shown growing up. That's part of their personality. Another personality is a saver. Now, you would think a saver is a great personality, and it is, because a saver is one of the easiest people that you can work with, because they really do understand the importance of putting away and saving for a dollar. Their issue is not with money. Their issue is with security. They put more faith into the money than they do into family, people, or even God. And I've seen savers who will forego the common sense, practicality, right thing to do because it will cost them money if they did it. In other words, a family member may need something. They know they can help and they can support it, but yet that's going to throw them off their budget.
Right.
So everybody has a good and bad. There's 2 more real quick personalities I deal with. The optimist. The optimist, again, you would think an optimist is very good personality to have, but an optimist sometimes can be too optimistic. In other words, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. They'll spend their money, things will work out, and then they'll use faith terms, especially in our community, that God will provide.
Right.
God knows God knows what I need, and He does. But God expects you to do your part.
Right.
And you have somewhat of an optimistic personality. I can't tell you how many people I help towards retirement, and yet they want to do all these things. They want to travel the globe. They want to go and get their dream car and or house. And I look at their retirement assets and I ask them, is there something I'm missing? Because your retirement savings don't support your optimistic retirement goals. And they say, well, it'll all work out. That's being too optimistic. You haven't done the practicality behind your optimism, and that comes back to hurt you. And then the last thing is I work with victims. Victims are, I was talking to one yesterday, he was nothing is his fault.
Mm-hmm.
The issues, the circumstances, and oh, by the way, he has a lot of money. He's in a very good position. And yet when he does run into a financial struggle, a financial roadblock, or a financial pushback, it's never his fault. And he has that victim mentality. So these 5 things, to answer your question, just to give you, I know I went around the way with it. Every personality requires a different type of strategy to help you with in terms of overcoming or leveraging it better. Because in my opinion, those 5, and there's a couple of more, but those are the 5 most common personalities I deal with. I can show them how you can leverage it as well as benefit it to change your mindset. But really the core competency to say, well, how do you change it is asking the question, what do you want? See, a lot of people are not clear on that one thing, Nikki, and that's just the truth. I don't care what personality you have. A lot of people are not clear on, when it comes to their finances, what do you want? In other words, they'll tell you, well, I just want to be comfortable. And I tell them all the time, there are people living under bridges right now
who are comfortable.
Or even if, and they may not be comfortable, but if you compare yourself to people living under the bridge, I think you would say that you're pretty comfortable.
Right.
I think you would say that you're eating every day. I think that you would say you have shelter over your head. You're comfortable already. So what do you want? So I want to get out of debt. Okay, so let's make it crystal clear. So when I start asking a person, understanding their personality first, and then asking them now, what do you want? Now we go into, that's the ending. Now we go back to the beginning and say, okay, now let me ask you, where are you right now? In other words, so the biggest thing is I have to identify who you are, how your personality works. Now I have to identify your want. What do you want? And then I have to go down to determine where are you right now, so we can understand the gap that we have to bridge. And now understanding that you're a spender and you have this $100,000 gap between what you want and where you are right now. Now I can show you how to get there based on those particular things. And then we go into a different type of strategies, but everyone's different. There's no carte blanche answer for anyone. That's the importance of understanding that each and every one of us, when it comes to finances, when it comes to how we were raised around it, when it comes to our priorities, we're all different. So I would never say here's a cookie cutter process on becoming wealthy, because it all's based on who you are and how God made you.
So many amazing nuggets. I'm going to recap a couple of them. I couldn't write fast enough. Listen, so he talked about 5 things. There's only 5 things that you can really do with money. Give it, save it, spend it, invest it, and protect it. That in of itself is like a whole nother podcast we need to do. That was so deep. But then he went into the money personalities, the spender personality. I know some, I've been that. The avoider personality, the saver, the optimist personality, and then the victims. So with all the things that we just, that I just recapped, I want to go into this next question. You've dealt with all these different categories, all these different type of mindsets, thinkers, and people and lifestyles. What would you say are some of the limiting beliefs when it comes to money?
Yeah, I would say some of the biggest limiting beliefs, and I'll just start with me, was the fact that money, or at least the type of money that I always at some point wanted to see myself accumulating, was not meant for me to have.
Oh.
Because I never saw it in my circle. See, a lot of us, we don't feel like we can have what we didn't see. And so for me, and what I deal with a lot of times with a lot of people I help, is that they can't get to the next level, whatever that next level is because they've never seen anybody on that next level. So they feel like it's not allotted for them.
Right.
And oh, by the way, let me just say, Nikki, I help people who are what I consider high net worth people. So I'm helping people on 6-figure to 7-figure levels now, but yet still are dealing with a struggle of understanding how to go to the next level. And I help people that may make, there's a couple that is based on that Money Monster book, that what gave me the opportunity and the insight to write it. They were a well-to-do couple. They lived in a 3,000 square foot home. They drove 2 luxury cars. You looked at them, they looked like somebody you pulled out of a magazine, GQ. They looked the part, but yet they were drowning. They were struggling. They were frustrated. But you would have never known it just looking at them because the money monsters were eating them up. So their mindset was they never could come up out of how they were raised. They didn't understand their own money personality. So even though they were both, one was an engineer, one had their doctorate, and they were both making nice income, they were still living as if they were in the, hood where they grew up. Right. Mentality. They just were doing it with better toys. So they were not great managers. They didn't understand how to multiply the money. And therefore it came back to continuously set them at the level that they always felt that they were set at. They just were doing it again in a bigger house, but they were still struggling. They had been married for years. And when they first got married, they lived in a very tiny apartment. They were struggling to do, so they always lived their, 17 to 18 years in struggle mode. It's just that they incrementally became a little bit more successful looking, but their mindset never changed. That's the biggest thing that I see when I'm helping my clients, when I'm helping people move to another level, is first of all, understanding just because you never seen it. And I had to struggle this way too. I never knew anyone in my family who was worth $1 million. I never knew anybody in my surroundings who had multiple businesses. I never knew anybody who could write checks to the church the way I've always wanted to write checks. I never knew that. So because I never saw it, I never knew I can be that. And it wasn't until I started believing that I serve a God that can pull me up to that level. And I serve a God that if he can do it for him or her, regardless if they don't look like me or they're no relations to me, I can still have and do those same things. So that's the biggest thing. Most people, if they don't see it in their upbringing or in their circle, they have a hard time accomplishing it. And that's a big hurdle for a lot of folks.
So I want to hit on something that you talked about, and you actually are taking me into the next part where I want to discuss your book, that you wrote the book because of this particular couple. The mindset that you said they had goes back to what we were just saying earlier.
Oh, okay.
Not just with the limiting beliefs, but the limited amount of information when they were growing up. But that happens to a lot of people who win the lottery, who reach instant fame or get like an inheritance, or even people who get their income taxes. Mm-hmm. The mindset has not shifted, but you have more money, or I think you phrased it, bigger toys to play with. You have more, but your mind your mind has not shifted. So when it came time to write this book, what was like the driving force that you felt, you know what, I've got to talk about this in a book?
That's right.
And then since we're on it, I really want to talk about one of my favorite chapters, which is They Thrive on Ignorance, how the money monsters thrive on our ignorance. So please tell us a little bit more about what pushed you to write the book, and why was it so important to put the chapter about ignorance in your book?
Yeah, so the book, first of all, The Money Monsters, it was my fourth financial book that I've written, but I believe it's the most important book that I've written because it deals with something that a lot of us as an African-American community deals with. Now, this book can speak to anybody and everybody because I help a lot of people of all different ethnicities, but I can tell you this really was something that I saw growing up in my family, in my circle, in myself. And then as I started climbing out of these and defeating these monsters, I started helping a lot of people that looked like me who were struggling with the same thing. So I said, I have to write this book to really, in my opinion, make it digestible and understandable. So The Money Monster, the concept for those who have not looked at the book yet, it talks about 7 things that I believe steals and scares our wealth away. And I call them the creepy eyes because they all start with the letter I. Yes. So, Nikki, you mentioned one of them was the ignorance monster. So that's one of the 7 that this couple was struggling with. And as I was helping them, I said, you know what? You guys are literally following the exact same thing that I've struggled with, that so many other people struggle with. And I have to put a term on it. And I believe you guys are struggling with what I call the money monsters. And so they gave me permission. I protected their identity. And I wrote this book around their walk to defeat these monsters. So the first monster I talk about is isolation, and how people try to, and particularly our people, try to do things in a bubble in terms of not going along and getting the necessary help. And they don't know who to ask and where to ask and how to ask. And a lot of that is different reasons, ego, or again, as we say in the hood, we fronting or whatever it is that we want to, act like we got more than we are. But so I talk about that, and I talk about irresponsibility, but I'll stop on the one that you talked about, the ignorance monster, because that is one of the biggest monsters. Because ignorance, as painful or as tough or as nasty of a word that is, ignorance is nothing more than not knowing.
Exactly. Yes.
Not knowing. So if you don't know, your job is now to go get the information and to know. So ignorance really is just that. When you don't know how or what goes around managing money or multiplying money or maintaining the money or even making the money, then that money tends to leave you, or very smart people will come around and cipher that money from you. That's exactly what was happening for me. My own ignorance kept me in a bubble, so people took advantage of me. Some knowingly, some unknowingly. Some institutions as big as banks were literally charging me happily a $15 to $30, $40, $50 service fee each month because I did not know to do simple things to prevent that fee. Some organizations or some companies or some people were charging me X amount because I didn't know to ask the right questions. Some people, again, was charging me extra interest rates because I didn't know what interest rates I had on my credit cards, didn't know that I didn't have to pay 18% interest, and I can go in and either refinance them or go put it on a card that was paying a 0% interest rate over 18 months and basically, again, take all that interest given to them and put that in my pocket. There's so many things that if you don't know surrounding money, it will hurt you. It will keep you broke. It will keep you in a position where your money won't grow. Now, that's basic stuff. But there's a lot of things now, and I don't necessarily tell people that you have to become a stock advisor or a stock equities analyst. Like, again, that's my core. That's my cup of tea. I deal in the stock market. I like to trade. I like to invest. But there were so many things before I understood this world that I live in now that was ignorant to me that now I can step into and make a living just trading in the stock market. That's the importance of killing the ignorance monster. Once I destroy it, and I'm not suggesting I know everything because there's still things I'm learning every day, but once I literally shot that ignorant monster in the head and said, no longer you will defeat me, I literally start stepping into multiple ways of how to build and grow my wealth. All because now I stepped into the know. And oh, by the way, it's out there for any and everybody to understand and learn as long as you're willing to step out there. And this is, again, you don't have to step out there by yourself. If you're willing to shoot the isolation monster in the head, you partner with somebody and get taught and get coached and get mentored. So this is why, again, it's important to not do this by yourself. And all these 7 monsters, as mentioned, that start with I, they can be defeated by, first of all, defeating the ignorance monster and then going after each and every one of them. So we talked about irresponsibility. We talked about isolation. We talked about ignorance. But the other 4 is, your illness monster. There's a lot of people who are struggling. They're not doing well because they don't feel well. And it all plays a role in it. As mentioned, I was about 75 pounds overweight when I was in my darkest times, and I was dealing with depression and frustration and anger, and I was literally about as sick as it can be. And this was in my prime of my life, in my mid-20s. I literally felt like I was 5 minutes away from having a heart attack. The illness monster was double teaming with the ignorance monster and the isolation monster trying to kill me. You have what I call the inheritance monster. Obviously, one of the things that the money monsters will do is they'll prevent you from handing down anything other than burdens and debts if you allow it. And we know that the word of God says a good man or woman leaves an inheritance for their children's children. And yet we have to prepare and position ourselves to do just that. And a lot of times, because that ignorance monster is not allowing us, when we do check out, or even before we check out, if we're not putting something back into the next generation or to our family or to our loved ones or to our church or whoever God says you need to put it back into, the inheritance monster would have prevented us from moving on. There's a couple of others. There's the inflation monster. We don't realize that anytime our money's not growing, it's being eaten away by inflation. So you can just test it anytime, any year. Take $100, go down to Walmart, buy your 5 favorite things, write it down, and go back 1 year later and see if that same $100 will not go as far. That's why God expects us to be increased in anything he gives us. He cursed the fig tree when the fig tree didn't provide anything for it, because he says, if you're not producing anything, you're useless. So that's why, again, the inflation monster will eat away our money in a heartbeat if we're not doing what we're supposed to do. And then the last one is the inertia. Inertia is just, you have the information, you know what you're supposed to do, but yet you still won't get up and get it done. You're sitting still. You're not saying go. I'm guilty as all get out. I've had so many opportunities where I could take it and go with it, being whatever it is, the information I've been given, regardless if it was finances or my health or my relationship or my spiritual life. And I just sat there and I allowed inertia to sit in and prevent me from taking that next step. And that's the biggest thing that we have to get over. Wow. Once we have all the information, once we know what to do, now God expects us to get up and go do it. And yet so many people just sit there and we don't do it. And these monsters are destroying us. They're eating away our lives. They're eating away our influence. They're eating away our income, our finances. They're destroying our families. They're destroying our health. They're destroying the next generation, because we are not in a position where we're increasing the next generation. Since we're talking about this book, let me just go all the way out with it. African Americans are projected to have, by 2053, and anybody listening to this, please Google it. Don't take my word. By 2053, it is saying on this projection that we're on right now, our net worth is expected to go to zero by 2053. Zero. Because they're saying we are spending. African Americans have $1.3 trillion of spending power. But yet, if you look at our net worth, assets minus liabilities, on average, we have about an $8,000 net worth per family. Compared to our Caucasian brothers and sisters, about $145,000. Our Asian brothers and sisters, about $127,000. Our Latino brothers and sisters, they have roughly about 15 to 16,000, but they're growing because they're growing in numbers, and yet we're going backwards. They're projecting us to go backwards. Mm-hmm.
Shawn, do me a favor. Repeat for us what you said our spending power is. Did you say 3.8 million?
I said, no, 1.3 trillion with a T.
It was 1.3 trillion in spending power versus zero in net worth.
Trillion. That's what we're projected to have. So in other words, they're saying, now again, that does not mean that we won't be driving the nicest cars. Doesn't mean that we won't live in nice homes. It means that when it's all said and done, what are you worth? So there are a lot of people, there are clients of mine, as mentioned, I talked about this couple who live in $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, and yet they still have a net worth of, $8,000.
Wow.
So basically it's saying, we're not owning anything. Mm-hmm. Anything that we're going out and we're borrowing for our houses and cars and all the other things, that we have as much liability on top of that. So 1.3 trillion. If we were a country, we would be the 15th largest nation in the world, right in front of Mexico. So again, Google it if you don't believe me, but it's $1.3 trillion of spending power in 2018. So obviously, that's going up every year. It's just a matter of what are we doing with it. So this is where I believe that God says, I will only give you what you can manage. And this is where I believe that not just us as a people, but us as you look at you individually, you look at your family as you're listening to it, look at yourself, look in the mirror. If you're on track, if you're doing everything God's called you to do, wonderful. Then go out and teach others, because here's the bottom line. The numbers support that we as a people are going backwards. But also, if we look at it as a whole, as a whole economy, we're all in trouble when you start looking at the national debt. You start looking at the student loan national debt. You look at the consumer credit card debt. All of them are skyrocketing. because we're all overspending. We're all at a particular point where we're not being the best stewards over what God's given us. And at some point, that'll have to come back and speak for itself. I'm certainly not a fearmonger. I'm certainly not projecting, predicting, or even hoping that we would step into something that we can't handle. But we are indeed digging our own graves if we don't do anything to change this.
Wow. We used your book, The Money Monsters. I'm just going to say the whole name again because I really want people to get this book. The Money Monsters, 7 Scary Ways They Steal Our Wealth. We used your book as a small group study. So we went through every single chapter and really just dissected when you talked about. One of the things that came up on this particular chapter on inheritance is the consumption. Our culture, the consumption is killing our culture. It's a poison. And how somewhere, some lie started that we started teaching one another either verbally or through our actions that the more you have, the more important you are, that it would make us somebody to have more things. The problem with that is what it does is puts money in the pocket of everybody but us. Like you said, the network could end up being zero, which is heartbreaking for a culture that is full of creators and inventors and kings and queens, a net worth of zero. Trying to take that in for a moment. Google it, but you don't even have to Google it. You can just kind of look around your area, your neighborhood, your network of friends. Like, how much is consumption important over having your money right, leaving an inheritance for your children, even making sure that your retirement is set up? We even talked about how we don't have our wills. Our wills are not set up. We have GoFundMes because we don't have our burials and our wills and everything set up. I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to talk about what it really means to be a good steward when it comes to that particular area right there.
Sure. Well, we are, first of all, a steward over what God gives us. So it's important for us to realize that we're just managing and holding on to stewarding everything that God has provided and given us. So our job is to make sure that we do it right. So you talked about the importance of not falling into the consumption trap. I wrote a book about that, and I believe that we are indeed a nation of consumers. And they've taught us, and we've fallen for the game that we are quote unquote customers. We wear it as a badge of honor. We are the customers. I've said it all the time. But if you look at that word, you're consuming. If you use that in a different
you
manner,
are the consumer.
the house or the you consume, like for example, the fire consumed the home, or I consumed all of my food today. In other words, you're talking about eating everything up, or you're devouring everything. That's exactly, as consumers, that's what we do. We devour, we eat it up. We are in a consumption trap, and yet we live in a nation that right now, as I was looking at the one of the money channels, they were saying, well, we're not going to go into a recession because their justification is the consumer is spending. They're very healthy. That's what's propping us up from going into what they consider a recession, because they say we are a nation of consumers and we're in this consumption trap. So while some people can possibly afford to do that, even though they're buying things they don't need, certainly, and they're not putting themselves in a financial pinch because they potentially can afford that. There's a lot of people that can't afford it. They're keeping up with the Joneses, or they're buying stuff that they're buying it just to buy it, or they're trying to soothe, and use spending as a means of an addiction, or to anesthetize their pain, or whatever it is that they're going through. So you have to, first of all, understand and step back and ask yourself, am I in this consumption trap? We all must spend to live. We understand that. We all need to pay bills. We all need to make sure that our dues are taken care of. But are you over consuming? So once you understand that and you step back and you look at it, that helps you understand the 5 things that you do with money. Because if you're doing the 5 things correctly, spending, yes, is a part of it, but it's not the most important piece of it. So therefore, now you can put money into the other things that you need to put money into to ensure that, again, as mentioned, inheritance is taken care of, that we don't have the GoFundMes, that you do have a proper will set up, that you step back and make sure that you have your priorities together. I always use this particular formula when I start looking at this is what got me out of my $200,000+ of debt. And God said, I'm going to start making you be responsible and giving you priority over your finances by giving you this simple formula. And it's going to take some people a little bit of struggle and strain to get there, just like it took me. But if you can do these 5 things with money, if you can put every dollar you get, put the first dime towards your faith. So I always say, again, that's tithing. So we know that if you're a believer, if you're listening to this podcast, you know that you should be at least tithing the first dime of every dollar. But here's the important thing now. You put the next dime to your future. Right. So you do your faith first, 1 dime, then the next dime is your future. Because let me tell you something. That's where you now start talking about saving. So the first dime goes to giving. The next time goes to saving. That's important because inside of each and every one of us is an older person that's depending on us right now to do the right thing. So when we step into our winter years, we have something to prepare us to step over into our retirement years.
That is so good.
The Bible says we are to be like this small, insignificant ant. The Bible says the biggest thing that you can look at in terms of leadership and responsibility comes inside of a small, insignificant ant. In Proverbs 6:6-8, it says, look at this ant. It has no commander, no overseer, but yet it collects its food in the summer, so it'll have provisions in the winter. So many of us are marching towards winter, and in our summer years, we're not doing the things that we need to do to prepare for it. And winter will get to the point, if we wake up, unless God calls us home, if we continue to wake up, all of us will wake up in winter, and winter will ask each and every one of us, what did you do in the summer years to prepare for today? I can tell you a lot of people that I help, they're walking towards their winter years with apprehension and not anticipation. We all should be walking towards our winter years in anticipation, saying, what's next, God? I prepared for this time. A lot of people are walking into these winter years with apprehension, like, oh my God, what do I do? Because they have not done that first dime giving, or my faith, second dime, my future, third dime, my freedom. That's where you take this dime now and say, okay, I'm going to now put this towards paying off the debt and or creating some type of freedom opportunities, be it entrepreneurship, multiple streams of income, something that's going to help me so I don't have to just depend upon either one job, or I be a good steward. So if God wants to shift me, I don't have to ask my checkbook permission because I'm prepared to do just that.
Oh, I love that. I don't have to ask my checkbook permission. I love it.
Absolutely. You know how many people would love to do, even if they don't have any money, and this is you, if you're listening to this, if God has called you and he's tapping on your heart and he's challenging you, he's to step out on faith, even if you don't have a dime, you should do it. But here's what prevents and stops a lot of people from doing it, because they don't have the money. And if they don't have the money, they don't have the cushion, they don't have the back spring, they don't have anything to support. What if it doesn't work? They don't do it. So many people, had they done the dime to my freedom over the years, and God gave them a little small inkling, they will jump, because they say, even if it doesn't go the way I'm expecting it to go immediately, I'm okay. But I'm going to trust God. Your faith grows much bigger when you have something that you have also prepared for. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you don't have anything, you shouldn't do it, because God can make a way. But I'm telling you, it becomes even more comfortable when you take another dime and you put it towards your freedom. So the first 30 cents, my faith, my future, my freedom, and then the next 65 cents of every dollar should be towards my family. That's the biggest brunt of your dollar. That's the stuff that requires you living day to day, spending on your mortgage, spending on your car notes, spending on your family, your food, all that. That's 65 cents. And then that next 5 cents should be my fun. God expects us to have fun. God expects us to enjoy ourselves. And yet it doesn't take a lot to do it. So if you take your income, and I encourage each and every one of you to do just that. If you take any dollar that you have, or if you multiply it over a monthly basis, over an annual basis, just put numbers to that. And what does that represent? But more importantly, what God is teaching you and showing you is a system. And priorities require systems. And once he gives you a system, now he can drop anything on you, and he knows that you know how to manage it. And that's the biggest thing right now. I believe that I keep saying it. And if you haven't heard me say this, please hear me. There are 4 pillars to money. There are 4 pillars to wealth. You first of all have to make it. Then you have to learn how to maintain it, because it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And then you must learn how to multiply it. But if you cannot manage it, it will be gone in a blink of an eye. Those 4 things, and the most important thing is the management piece of it. And this is where you get that. And God gave it to me through that simple little formula of those 5 things. And he said, now you know how to manage money. And I'm going to give you not just money, because the Bible also says, and in Luke 16:11, if you're not faithful over these worldly riches, then how can you be faithful over true riches? So what he's given me is now a burden and of responsibility to help so many others, because he said, you can manage the worldly stuff. I'm going to give you true riches, which is really helping people get to the next level in their life. So that's the management piece is so important, and that'll help a lot of people move forward with their finances.
Oh my God, I told y'all he was so amazing. Quick recap. And I cannot recap everything that he said because he said it beautifully. Please rewind if you need to. But the first dime, you give it to faith, which is giving. The second dime goes to your future, which is saving. The third dime goes to your freedom, paying off your debt, investing,
yes,
creating another form or stream of income. 65 cents of every dollar is toward your family or your bills, basically taking care of your business. And then 5 cents goes to your fund. I love those. And then you gave us the 4 pillars, which is you make it, you maintain it, multiply it, and you manage it. I think if we combine all of that, plus everything that you've taught us so far today, we really can shift our minds when it comes to money and have better money management. Just even the last 2 things that you just talked to us about, because I don't think we think about our money like that. We think Friday comes, what bills do I need to pay? And then you either take everything and throw it toward bills and nothing toward saving and investing or anything like that. And then you're broke again with nothing to show for it. Or you hit those winter years, like you said, and you look back and you start having those regrets. Man, if I would have only done this in my 30s or only did this when I had that job or saved up here. And then we have these regrets, and people, I know so many of them who have retired, but they're still working. They have retired, but they're still working at the Walmart at the door, or they're still driving a taxi, or they're driving a city bus because they couldn't afford to stay retired. They had to get a job just to survive.
Absolutely. And like you said, nothing wrong with any of those particular jobs if you want to retire and still go do anything. It's only becomes an issue and a problem when you have to do it. And that's where when the options are taken off the table, and that's the sad position of anybody who has made it through this long life, and you reach in their 60s and 70s, and now you still have to work just to continue to eat and pay bills. And that's not a judgment on anybody, but that's to say, moving forward, anybody who's listening to this podcast, don't put yourself in a position. If you are in your summer years, God says you still have time to collect food for winter. It's just that you have to do it. And that's the monster that a lot of us have to face, is the inertia monster. And that is just doing it.
Yeah, just doing what you need to do. I wish I could have you on for so many more hours. You are absolutely amazing and gifted, and I really do appreciate it. We're going to start wrapping it up, y'all. I'm sorry. We have to start wrapping it up.
Thank you.
Here on The Obstacle Overcomer, our motto is obstacles are not barriers. They are stepping stones. So, Shawn, I want to ask you, how can the obstacle of a challenging financial situation become someone's stepping stone?
First of all, accept it that wherever you are in life, it is not a burden. It could be a blessing, and it's going to be a teachable moment, not just for you, but for whoever God has to put in your path. So the first thing is, it's just that. It's a stepping stone. I love the fact that everything is a season. If you come into my house right now, Nikki, and you said, "What are you doing, Shawn?" I said, "I'm throwing out all my heavy coats." And you said, "Why are you throwing out all your coats? These are nice coats." I said, "Because it's summer. And right now it's 100 degrees and you would look at me like I'm crazy because you would say, Shawn, but don't throw those away. I would say, why? You say, because this is just a season. It's going to change.
Come on, Shawn. Yes.
But yet so many people, what they do is they get caught up in their current season thinking that's not going to change. It's going to change. Your job is to understand that you're in that season. What can I learn from this? Because as you said, it is nothing more than a stepping stone. Now, I understand it's much easier to understand once you're out of it. I understand it's much easier to say it and give it to somebody who's not in that. But every storm I was in, every financial adversity, every tsunami I was going through, the key was I was going through it, not knowing that I would be in the position I am in today. But I had people in front of me saying, just keep on walking and learn something from this. Yes, you got ripped off. Yes, you had to pay these bad debts. Yes, you may have overpaid for this credit card or whatever. But what did you learn from it? Because if we don't learn from it, it does become a failure. But if we learn from it, it's just nothing more than tuition. It's a life lesson that you can take to help you strengthen yourself and, more importantly, step back and help somebody else so they don't make that same mistake.
Wow. That was so good. That was like the best piece of German chocolate cake after the best meal you just had. In our final wrap-up questions, I have a little segment here that I want to do with my guests, and that's called Getting to Know You, where our listeners can just get to know just a little bit more about you. And I'm sure in something that you're going to say will help them. The first question I would like to ask is, if you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say first would be Martin Luther King Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Second would be Malcolm X. And then third would probably be, oh man, if I say this, I would have to, I'm going to say it. It would be my father. And the first two are hopefully, kind of a no-brainer. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, they both were tremendous in terms of their meaning in this world. And for anybody with our color, the landscape they changed and the opportunities they opened up, even though they both had their own different styles and strategies. So that would be a no-brainer. But the third would be somewhat of a personal, because you got to understand, I've never met my father a day in my life. My biological father, I never laid eyes on him. I didn't know who he was. And the sad thing is that my parents were married for 7 years. But when my mother was pregnant with me, my father decided he was ready to go, and he divorced me. He literally threw up the peace signs and he walked away from his family, never to be seen again. I didn't find out till about 5 years ago that he passed away, and that's always been a void in me. And not that I would want to meet him to tear his head off or to eat into him, because I had a wonderful stepfather that came in and filled in the gap. Mm-hmm. But I would just want to sit down with him and understand and know that God designed it the way he designed it. And I would thank him for his contributions for my life, but just to sit down with him and understand and learn a little bit more about him so I can learn a little bit more about myself.
Beautiful. And then the very last question I'll ask, if you could give your younger self any piece of advice, what would you say to yourself?
Oh my goodness. I would say, first of all, you absolutely have the capacity, you have the fortitude, and you have, more importantly, God behind you to do whatever it is that you want to do. I did not really start believing in myself until I hit probably my 30s, maybe mid-30s, that really started understanding and believing that I had something that I could share with a lot of people. But yet God he's always given me this inclination. Even when I was a teenager, I always found myself in leadership roles, but I never wanted to be there. I always pushed that away. And yet if I'd have owned into that early in life and understood it and allowed it to develop and got the right teaching and tutoring and mentoring around me, then I probably would have been unstoppable. And I thank God for my path. I'm not knocking where I am right now, and I appreciate it. But the fact is that it took me too long to step into the calling that God put on my life. And if I can go back and talk to my younger self, I would say, you got it. Just believe in yourself and move forward.
I love it. Oh my God, I love it. I said I couldn't keep you more than the time that we've already agreed upon, but I really I have so many more questions.
Come on.
So many that I couldn't even get to today. Shawn, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You not only took out the time to be on our podcast today, but you really genuinely poured out your heart. And I am so honored again that you were my very first guest here on the Obstacle Overcomer podcast. I'm hoping that you will not be a stranger and that you will come back, but thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. And again, as mentioned, I'm humbled that you asked me, but I am so glad I got an opportunity to participate on this incredible, new, wonderful podcast. And if you have me back, I guarantee and I commit to coming back.
Thank you so much. Before you go, please tell our listeners how they can connect with you and follow you on social media.
Absolutely. Well, you can follow me on all the social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, on Shawn Dorrough, ShawnDorrough. You can also connect with me on my website, which is the Wealth Shift Project. However, at the time of this recording, just to let you know, I'm undergoing construction. I'm building out a new website, so it may still be down when you pull it up. But you can certainly, if you want my books on Amazon and all those other areas, you can just Google me and you'll pull me up. Or you can send me an email at Shawn@thewealthshiftproject.com, and I'll be more than happy to get you signed copies of the 5 books that I currently have.
Alrighty. Well, thank you again for being on. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. Do not forget, you are an overcomer. Obstacles are not barriers. They are stepping stones. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this was your first time tuning in, welcome to the Overcomers family. I cannot adequately express my gratitude to all of you for tuning in today. If today's show helped or impacted you in any way, it would help me tremendously if you would review and rate today's episode. And please be sure to leave me a comment on whatever platform you were listening to this podcast. Also, be sure to connect with me over on Facebook and Instagram at the Obstacle Overcomer Podcast. And if you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, you will be notified every time there's a new episode available. And don't forget that sharing is caring. So please go ahead and tell a friend and share this with your loved one, because this will help me to reach those who really need a word to empower their lives. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget that obstacles are not barriers. They are stepping stones. Talk to you next week.